About cybersecurity, and I will continue today and then make a transition to cyber resiliency. So let me quickly share my slide, and then we can do a quick recap. So you can see my slide okay, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir. This is sir.
All right, so this is what we have talked so far, that the key concept of cybersecurity is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We talked about privacy, non-repudiation, authenticity, and all of these are different features of cybersecurity when we say that something is secure or not, right? And we compare some examples. We talked about, this is where we stopped, and then we'll talk about how does it apply to the power grid, right? So before we talk about that, let's talk about threat, which typically means that unless we have threat, unless we have an actor, uh, who wants to attack our system, uh, there is no compromise, right? So unless we have someone who is looking for to attack the system or compromise the system, we will not be, we will not be worried about our cybersecurity. So threat is basically a set of circumstances or event where we have a potential of someone attacking the system that we are talking about. So threat is the first thing. If you don't have a threat, if you think that there's no one thinking about our cyber system who will attack it, then there's no threat, right? Unfortunately, that's not true. So it doesn't matter that how small utility are or how bigger the system is. There are some different kind of actors which will utilize some event or circumstances to get access to or get unauthorized access or compromise the system. So threat is the first thing. Who is trying to attack and compromise? And in what circumstances? If you have a threat, but you don't have a vulnerability, if you have everything which is analog, they cannot find a vulnerability to attack your system, right? Other than a physical attack, which will not be a cyber attack anyway. So vulnerability can be different kind, like physical, which is we are not talking about one. We are talking about cyber vulnerabilities, and cyber vulnerability is a weakness in an information system, which is again cyber system, right? So information system is same thing, which is starting from sensing to the communication to computing, and then giving the control command. So all these are four places where the vulnerabilities can be compromised. So as long as we have a digital data packet being generated, being transferred, and being converted to a control signal, we will have some kind of vulnerability in each part of this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So vulnerability as the one which is being exploited by a threat source. Now you have a threat, which means that you have circumstances, event, and actors, and then you have vulnerabilities. Now, if we understand both of these, unfortunately we don't, but if we understand some of these, then we try to find what is the risk to your system, right? So a measure of the extent where a system, which is cyber physical system and entity, is threatened by these threat and vulnerability combination to result into impact. And if I can compute the probability of that occurrence resulting into that impact, will be a risk, right? If I can understand my cyber risk, which depends on vulnerability, which depends on threat, then I can prepare for it, right? Just like we do the power system, security analysis, where we find the risk of impact by doing if then analysis, which start with the list of contingency that can happen, and then we try to simulate the power flow. We can also, if we have enough computing resources and tools, we can also do the impact on voltage stability, impact on transient stability, impact on frequency stability, right? So just so what we're trying to do there, we're also trying to find the risk of certain contingency and how it impacts the grid. Here we are talking about the same thing, but now in the cyber term. Okay, so risk, vulnerability, and threat. These are very important before we start looking for the solution. If the risk is really, really low, right? So you will get two different kind: high risk and low impact. Low risk but high impact. And then you can also get high risk and high impact, which we don't have many. We should not have many, but we might have. And low risk and low impact is the one which you will not care much about, right? Because it's not going to happen and it will not impact my system. So why to care about that much? This high frequency, low impact. High frequency means that it is happening. The chances of happening it's high, right? So likelihood is high, right? So if you look at this graph, it is saying the impact, which is consequences, on the right side, or the bottom x-axis, and likelihood, which is basically the same thing, which is likelihood of occurrence here, and impact. Impact is consequences, and likelihood is this graph. So if you look at these, again, less impact and very high, we will be probably a little bit worried, but not too much. If it's a high impact, of course, we have to worry about a lot. And especially if there is a high chances of that. So this is somewhere that we should focus most, because it is going to happen, more chances, and it is going to impact my system. So all these different kind of things, like someone is probing, right? So that is, of course, very high chances. Someone just trying to figure out that what do I have as a cyber physical system operator. Most probably this happens most often, so that's why it's high frequency, highly likelihood, because someone is probing the system without knowing that where they are, because you only are starting this probe with the IP addresses or something which attacker can get to. So they are more curious that where they are getting into. And then if they compromise the system, then again the chances is pretty high, but typically consequences will be not much unless it impacts the physical system. Once they get into the system control, right, that's where there is more impact, right? More impact, because now they can change things. If they can deny a service, there will be definitely more impact. Warm, depending on what it's doing, it could be ranked even here or here, is definitely going to disrupt my system operation, because that's why it's warm. So this whole thing, which is kind of low level, because it is not caused by state-sponsored attacker, which means the attacker is not very strong. They are not a group of 10 people like now we have threat actors. There are individual hackers or individual criminals who are trying to do something, right? So that's why it's low level. So it's less structured, it's not very well planned, and someone is trying to be just curious and trying to hurt the system because they are either criminal to make some money, or they are trying to hurt because they were disgruntled employee. Once it becomes more organized, which is like a threat group with several multiple attackers, they can hire even hackers and activists and insiders. It becomes more high impact, right? With the same likelihood, but more high impact. And then comes much higher, which is top level, like one state one country is trying to hurt another country. They have a large terrorist group which is sponsored, or very group of people which is trusted insider, right? Even one or two will, if they're insider, they will hurt the system more. So this will be high impact, right? And once you say the directed cyber attacks, which is structured here, and then this one is more highly structured because there are multiple, could be hundreds of people with the state sponsored that are trying to hurt another country. Okay, so that will be like a cyber terrorism to gain the major economic. All these are important to understand, that to know that why someone is attacking the system, and a motive will increase the risk and impact, right? At least the impact. So as you know that threat, which you can try to understand that who will attack my system in what circumstances and what event, right? That's important. The next thing, most important, is the vulnerabilities. So you can have a threat, like I said, but if there's no vulnerability, they can't get into the system and cause a problem, right? Again, they can do the physical problem. So how do we find the vulnerabilities? So you have a digital packets from sensing, communication, computing, all the way till the control signal. So vulnerabilities are everywhere, which is basically your open door and open gate where attacker can get in, right? So that vulnerabilities that exist depends on what kind of software we are using, right? So software, if you are having any computer or even a cell phone, and you get those updates, software updates, these are done for two things. One, that there's a new features that they want to activate, and second thing is that there is vulnerability that they want to remove. And that's why you get a new software update in your computer or in your cell phone sometime. So which means that it has to come from the software which is handling either communication or computing or even the sensing, because there is still, I mean, all of these has some kind of microprocessor, and there is software which is running that, right? There are hardware vulnerabilities which we are not talking about because that's hard to exploit and require much more resources, and that's typically relate to the supply chain issue. So software vulnerabilities are the one that we're trying to find, and because software is in everywhere, the one which is running the communication, one which is running the computing for the analysis, one which is changing into control, and one which is sensing. New vulnerabilities are found every day because we do have those digital devices in the power grid. Not only in the power grid, but we have in a lot of these other things. Either it's education system or banking system, or it's anywhere where the computers are or microprocessors are. And these vulnerabilities are so important that unless we know it, it's like a list of your contingency that happens in the power grid. This is also a list of vulnerabilities. Unless we know it, we can't fix it. We cannot do if then analysis. What if this vulnerability is exploited? So in US, we maintain this National Vulnerability Database, NVD, which provides a list of all the vulnerabilities and exposure, and that is called CVE. So, and this one is NVD, which is basically finding the vulnerability database, putting the basically preparing the database, and how they are doing is based on the CVE. Now, as you can imagine, CVE are only few which is known. There are not more which is unknown. Anytime unknown is utilized by attacker, we call it 0-day attack. Why? Because we don't know about this. So it's a 0-day attack. Attacker learned for that vulnerability first before we can do it. Of course, every country, almost every bigger country, they have a pen tester, which is called penetration testing. And the only job that they are doing is finding the vulnerability of any device. So you have to bring that into your lab and start doing the cyber vulnerability analysis. without getting access to the actual device, we cannot perform. We cannot perform the vulnerability analysis. So this pen testing is the first thing. Of course, you have to understand your threats, but the most important thing is the pen testing. Without that, we cannot discover the vulnerabilities. Of course, we can hire attacker, right, and tell them that go find the vulnerability in this device. But remember that just in PowerGrid, we have like millions of digital device. But we have to categorize that. And once we categorize that, which company and which software version they are running, then most probably that same device, which is from the same vendor and same software version, should have the same vulnerabilities, right? So now we can reduce these millions to a few thousands. Now, if I upgrade that to a new software version, that brings another set of vulnerabilities, or can bring, right? It's not necessary that it'll definitely bring, but every time we are doing a new software version, we might bring new vulnerabilities, because which is of course not known in advance. If it was known in advance, then they will patch it before launching that software version. Okay, so pen testing is the first thing to find out the cyber vulnerabilities. Typically, if I find one, then I should tell the vendors that go and fix it, right? And it's not easy. Just think about, can we take out all the devices or even few of the devices from the PowerGrid, which is operational, and do the software updates? We cannot, the work of that software, which is running that hardware in the PowerGrid, is needed 24/7, right? Every hour, every minute, every second. If we want to plan the outage of the device and do the software version update, it's a nightmare. How do you do that? Because it's not your computer, which is okay, you're sleeping and you don't want your computer to work for you, right? At that time, in rare cases, you might, but you have a lot of time when you can have some downtime and do the software installation. So it becomes very tricky to how to do that for real PowerGrid, which is operational, right? And that's why OT security database and then OT security vulnerabilities and patching it is very, very tricky. You cannot try to do that remotely, right? If you try to do remotely, you have to provide the access, which is also opening the access for the attacker, right? So most of the time, you actually want someone to go physically and install a new software version, and that person should be trusted and should patch any known vulnerabilities through pen testing. So a little bit more about, you can actually go to the cve.mitre.org or even search cve.org, and these are published. Once it's published from the NVD also will give you that information. There's more explanation with MITRE, which is one of the national lab here in US, and so that in NIST, right? So they take that same thing, which is published in NVD, and then do some their own interpretation, and then there are multiple sites which provides more information about a specific CVE. Now there are different way to rank those CVE, right? So just like in the PowerGrid contingencies, you will do the power flow to analyze the impact in terms of overvoltage and overload. And those are most typical. But if you're looking at the transient stability, then you will be scoring the contingency list in the PowerGrid using the impact on the chances of happening the stability problem. Here, everyone is trying to figure out that how do I rank these vulnerability, right? These vulnerability are kind of if then, contingencies, and we want to score them so we can rank them that which one to fix first. Remember, it's not easy because things are running 24/7. If I can rank it, then I'll decide that okay, now I have to send a one person which will go to this substation, or wherever the device is. It could be a generating station, could be at the pole top, it could be even on the ground with in some box installed, and they need to go and fix those, and I need to coordinate in such a way that I use the human who's trying to do that in a best possible way. So CVSS, there's one organization which is First Reliability, and they tried their own score system. I mean, we in our research group we tried our own research scoring system. So everyone is trying to do different ways. Of course, we have a better at least we think that we have a better justification to score them. First, organization think that they have the better one, and if someone else is doing that, they think they have a better one, right? So there's no standard way of ranking these vulnerability. How you can rank it, because you want numerical score, right? I personally think, and that's how we do in our research group, that these should be scored not only because of cyber impact, but more importantly because of the physical system impact. Of course, it's more harder, but if I have a test bed where the cyber is tied to the physical system, I can probably do that, right? So CVSS, which is done at the first, they don't look at the physical system where it's tied to, which I believe that the cyber system exists because we want a service in the physical system. If cyber is compromised, of course it's a problem, but maybe that problem is not causing any problem to the physical system. So why I should rank it high? The one which will impact the power grid, I want to rank that high. Okay, so that's why our system of scoring is different than so for rest of the other group who also rank these vulnerabilities. Now there are market for these vulnerability, which is unfortunate. And typically if you learn the new vulnerabilities, you will tell the vendor and disclose them, and if they fix it, all good, and then you can publicly disclose it that there was a this vulnerability which I told to the vendor and they fixed it, and then you can put it publicly because it doesn't matter, no one can compromise it because it's already fixed. Now someone figure out, which is of course with some criminal activities, that we can sell it. We can tell the vendor that, hey, you have this vulnerabilities, and if you want to buy it, if you want to know that what vulnerability is, then give me money, right? They cannot do it legally because government, most of the government in different country has already declared that you should, for good of the country, you should tell the vendor as soon as possible, right? And public will remain unaware of that, right? Which is okay. This is not the most updated list, but there's a whole black market for these vulnerabilities. And as you can think about that, iOS, which is Apple software, will have a maximum price because it's supposed to be more secure, the way system is designed. Then Google Chrome, then Microsoft Edge, then Firefox. This is just an example. It will keep on changing the time that you check it. But it does have and someone, you can see like $500,000, which is a lot of money, right? Vulnerabilities, how it looks like and how you score them, at least from the first reliability website. So these are some old vulnerability list, which is again, it is named the year when it was discovered and at what number it was discovered, right? So CV to 2013 0665, base score is 6.2, impact is 10, and how this number is given is very simple formula, which again you can go and look at the CVSS website. and find out those formula. Exploitability, of course, that's important. So impact is important, but they're only looking for the cyber and chances of that being impacted. Exploitability, which is that, what are the chances that this will be exploited by attacker, right? If it is very tough, if it is not easy to getting exploit, you have to go to one device, then another device, and third device, and then compromise. While there's enough security there, then exploitability should be low. If it is only one device, and you can directly get into that because you already have access to a lot of different people, then exploitability should be very high, right? So exploitability will depend upon that. What are the chances of this vulnerability getting exploited by an attacker? Some are high, some are low, and different year again. And then resiliency impact, which is again in the cyber. So these numbers are very, very simple, and you will look at the again. You can look at the CVSS website. So what are those, like, for example, this was in 2013. Of course, most probably it has, all of has been fixed, because that's why I'm talking about some old ones. So SCL Accelerator Quickset, has a weak permission for its program files directory, which allows local user to replace Siemens one, and then Siemens, another Siemens, and then this one. Of course, almost all the device, doesn't matter that where they are from, GE, Siemens, SCL. When it was first discovered, it had a some kind of vulnerabilities, and most recent one, like in 2018 or even last year 2024, these are like a Eaton, but Eaton says that this vulnerability appears in version, and they don't no longer support it, so it probably has been already replaced, right? And this one is from Hitachi in 2021. Another one with GD60, okay, line distance relay. So these are the devices that we really have. We're using it. As soon as we learn, we have to fix it. Okay, so these CVE are there, and most of them should be passed, but it's not necessary, because utility will decide that how do we use the vendor and different resources to fix and patch it. Patch means like vulnerability is gone. So now next thing is that these vulnerabilities may reside deep in network, which means that you cannot directly, it's there, there's one device which is there, but you cannot directly reach there. You have to go through 3 more devices to reach there. Every device you have to kind of hack into, and if you try to do that, the chances of you being caught as an attacker is very high, right? Luckily, which is a good thing, that most of our vulnerability reside deep in the network, industrial control system network. Only 20% is network facing, and that means that it can be easily compromised, right? Because you don't need to make a multiple hop to reach there. Unfortunately, which is lot of OT devices are still using very weak password, right? And 80% time when we see those attack happening is because of that. To get the access to OT, which is not connected to anywhere, right? Everything is secure, right? I mean, that's how it's designed. Attacker need to go through IT, which is open, and they can get access to OT. And almost 75% of attacks start with an email. So attacker will be sending thousands or millions of emails, and even they just need one click, right? One person who was not so careful and then clicked it, and then that's how they got access, malware installed, and getting access to the OT. Unfortunately, someone is still following these kind of things, which should not be, right? Don't put your login and password right there in the substation room, because the same thing can be read by more and more people, and even shared through a text or something, so that to make it easier to access. To make it easier to access is a problem, is opposite of making it secure. So vulnerabilities, I was talking about millions of devices, which is there. With Internet of Things, these millions are becoming billions, right? So we have these millions of devices with power grid, but now you have demand response, you have a DERs, you have a you know electric vehicle, and all those are the device that is connected with them is IoT, and then these millions becomes in billions, which is additional problem for us. Not everything in the power grid, right? But because IoT devices does not need to be only in the power grid, but still we're running into billions. So how do we patch it? How do we find out that what vulnerability it has? Digital footprint, and that's a big problem. It's just increasing and increasing, right? So 5+ billion right now in as of last year we had internet social media users. Why it is important? Because as many people there are, they will probably get email or get a link on the social media which they will click, that will result into a direct installation of malware in their computer. um, Another example of digital footprint, that now in as of 2025 we have like 376 billion emails sent every day, sent and received. Again, they only need one email which has, but not any random emails of a person, but those emails which has access to IT and OT, right? To get the access started for the attacker. Number of CV, we already talked about CV. You can also get from cv.org information. Uh, as of yesterday, it was 282,186, which is discovered. How many unknown? We don't know. I mean, we have like hundreds, thousands of people who are working and doing the pen testing to find out the device which has CVE vulnerability, right? But doesn't mean that we will know all the billions. We need millions of people performing these pen testing. Still, we will not say that we will be the first to find out before attacker does, right? Because it's just like a random process, right? So the one which is their new device, maybe attacker will be faster than you as a defender. So this is a busy slide. The purpose is not to show that and explain each of these, but this whole cyber attack landscape is so vast, right? If you start with that HMI, this is software, which is human machine interface. Almost every device that need to be configured will need to have HMI, and it means that there's a software which can be compromised, right? SCADA, you already know. OT, you know, operational technology. PLC is programming logic controller, which is also installed at the Microsoft substation, which is trying to control, with a certain logic, right? So it is needed to even do the generator control or all of those things. And if you have seen PLC, then you know that it has a software. And if it has software, again, it has a vulnerabilities, and some we know and some we don't, right? Industrial control system, we've been talking about distributed control system, DCS, engineering workstation. Of course, you need that to get into the different devices like a PLC. So many different things here. I'll not go into all of these, but there is IoT. There's a ISO independent system operator we have talked about. There's a MITRE framework, attack framework, which is MIT. There's a SIP, which is the central critical infrastructure protection, which is NERC SIP, which is NERC is our North American Electric Liability Corporation, which has made the SIP uh, to protect the grid, to practices to follow, and everyone's to follow that, right? SOC we talked about, Security Operations Center, right? So there's a lot to talk about. You will have the slide. You can go to the a person who developed it, Mike Holcomb, and a little bit look more detail about, right. Of course, these are only like a word and does not tell that what it does, and this is not complete either, right. I mean, this is of course a good, very good landscape, but it's not complete. So how do attacker attacks, right? Of course, there has to be threat, which is basically attackers, right. And then there has to be vulnerabilities, and then we need to find the risk, and then we have to prepare for it, those possible risk, and then defend when it happens, right. So how do they attack? Hopefully it is very clear that without vulnerabilities attackers cannot attack, right. And if so attacker exists, it means that threat exists, we already know that, right. Without um, without vulnerabilities it will not be, right. So that's what we're saying, cyber attack happens only if there is a vulnerability exist and someone is exploiting it. Another important part is that to get to a device which is vulnerable or has the vulnerabilities, you need access. And if you don't have access, then it will not be compromised either, right? Uh, if it is network facing, it's like it's the same thing that I was talking about. That the door has to be, or window has to be opened. If you don't have access, you cannot get to compromise that vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities we already talked about. It is in software, right? Different kind of vulnerabilities and how to compromise that has been named differently. Like a Heartbleed was one, which was came long several years before. Uh, Proper physical security is also a problem because you can combine a physical, access to cyber access to make it easier for the attacker. Social engineering is same thing that we talked about, that through email or through social media or through some even WhatsApp, right. uh, anyhow you get into user to click on that and get something installed on any of the devices. MITRE framework, which is the one thing that is pretty comprehensive. You can take it's again, this is something that we are not going to explain everything, but it's an example of one framework. There's a lot of other framework, and this is called attack framework, and they keep coming up with new version and new version. Now they have IoT devices, they have OT, Caldera, uh, you know, uh, so different framework. Again, MITRE is one of the national lab which is working on cybersecurity and several other things. But what is important here is the top one: persistence, privilege escalation, defense, evasion, and credential access, and then discovery, and then lateral movement, and then execution, then collection, and then exploration, and then command and control. Attacker wants to persistently attack the system, get to the privilege, and then the final goal, we assume that their final goal is to get to the command and control center, right. If they cannot get to the control, they cannot get to the command, they will not be able to impact the system. So which means that I can take any attack that has happened in the past, any attack, and I can map what method was used for being persistence, what method was used for privilege escalation, what method was used for defense evasion, and what was used for credential access. So what is important is that these steps, first, which is more like a persistence and privilege escalation, How do I get my first hook to gain access to information? And once I gain that access, then how do I, what software, what malware, uh, what worm I need to develop to utilize these vulnerabilities? How do I deliver it? That's third step. And then after that, how attacker can exploit it, right? So these all four like initial steps, which is will become hard and hard if you make your system more secure, right? Once it's exploited and installed, this what were the malware or what were the this attacker software is, once installed, then the ultimate goal is to do the lateral movement and do the exploitation and get to the command and control, because if they don't get there, they can't impact the system, and then action on the objective, right? So these are the simple way, but like I said, that MITRE is one of the framework. We do have a several more framework, uh, and ultimate goal being that how do I understand each an attack vector and how it is going through these steps, which is simplified steps, and then use that, right? So footprinting is first of one of the first thing that attacker will probably do to find out that how do I find my hook, how do I find my that open window, open door. So footprinting, if any company has a higher digital print, the chances of them being attacked is very high compared to any company which has a very less digital footprint. So to find out, the attacker is looking for information that where is the control center located, where are the substation, what kind of digital device it has, what are the IP addresses, is it in public, is it you cannot even see the IP addresses, of course that's what you want. What are the email addresses of the utility company employees, right? These are the hook. I mean, if they can find the social media, if they can find the WhatsApp, of course that will also help attacker to get into that, but these are the footprint that they're looking for, and there are tools for that. They also have the access to like war dialing, scanning, traffic sniffing, any data packet that is flowing from my computer right now to your computer is a digital footprint of this information, the talk that I'm doing right now, the words that I'm saying. And if it's happening, then it means that someone can track it, depending on how secure it is. And if someone can track it, they can do the traffic sniffing. That's the first thing to do that. Um, there are websites like showdown.io where you can go and look at. It will give you any devices which is on the public web servers. Unfortunately, there are a lot which should not be. So access to data, which is we are trying to minimize, and only for someone who is authorized to do that. Control center operator, like who will have access, right? And why they will have it. So this is just one example. A production engineer are supposed to have, of course, access to production devices, and they possibly also have a control center access to, right? Technicians who are there to fix the problem and make sure that everything is running fine, they will also have access to protection, and may not be directly to the control center, but indirectly. Corporate offices, they will not have direct access to any of these, but through operators or through uh, you know technician or someone else, they will also have access to protection. So that for control and for monitoring, not a direct access, but indirect access. Now, if you count the indirect access, then it just becomes more and more people. So we do provide access in different format. Someone has to log into VPN, virtual private network, to get from one computer to another computer. Sometime we'll make it, old technology, which is dial-up network. Sometime we'll make it easier with, like there are some engineers, I have met who were running part of their grid through their cell phone. Of course, it's not possible if you do the NUCSIP, uh, but that happens only in the bigger, larger grid operator. If you're only operating like a small county, city power grid, you don't need to follow all these security practices because it's not required by NERC. And and several different countries, just for easy access, they install the app, which they have developed themselves, and they're using it, running with the cell phone. Of course, they can design their cell phone in such a way that they will not talk on that phone, or there will be no WhatsApp, there will be no different other software to minimize digital footprint. But it's possible, right? Any remote logon program is, of course, provided access also. And then some other technique, which is like a Trojan horse for backdoor access with unknown service port, also attacker can get into. So if you apply this to like something like a substation, this is IC6150. Again, remember that anything is going to be compromised if it has the vulnerability that exists, either known or unknown. Plus, there's access, right? Of course, the third category we already talked about, that exploitability, right? How easy it is to access the device with vulnerability. It's very hard. And fourth thing is that actually we wrote a paper almost like 20 years before, where we added more and more features: vulnerability, access, exploitability, ability to get caught. Because all of these are important for attacker to decide that, hey, they want to compromise or not. Because if they're going to caught in the first and second step, then they will probably not go for that. So if you look at the substation, you have IEDs, you have relays, you have PMUs, you have a control level, process level, actuator, circuit breaker, merging unit, CT and VT that we have talked about. Station level, you have user interface so that you can get and see these things. You have a GPS. Every time it is happening, GPS is giving, getting a signal from 3 satellite, and then it has software which is going to lock into that, and then it has a this GPS signal. If I can disrupt that synchronization as attacker, that's one thing possible. You can spoof the GPS too. User interface compromise, that is possible right here. IDs, gaining access at the base level devices, changing the device settings is possible. And these are just the example of a few threat, circumstances which can happen because of the attacker. Process level, you can modify the GUJ message, you can generate fabricated and log values. A lot of these, again, examples, right? All of these basically give us the attack tree, right? That if I take this one of these, like change device setting, how do you get to the relay, right? So it has to start somewhere. If the relay is not directly connected to any access, how the attacker will reach there? So then you can basically develop a graph for the access control, which we call it attack tree. These are basically a leaf that you want to reach to. If it's not connected with something else, if it's connected with something else, then it will become a branch, right? Because branch will connect to two more things. So you can think about access to, like you are going to, one destination to another destination. You're driving on the car. And if you start from your home and you reach to your lab, you have to follow a certain set of streets. But that's not typically, maybe it's only one way to get it, but it's not necessary. There are 10 ways of getting your lab from your home or your hostel or whatever you're coming from. Same thing for attacker. If they have access to one device, But that device is nothing but information, and they can't control anything. And they want to control a certain breaker, which requires them to reach to another device, which is just like a lab. So they can go from their home, which is the first device that they have access to the destination, which is a control device, relay, or or something which can operate the control. They can reach there in multiple different ways, and that's what we want to capture, and that is a graph. So they can reach to their destination, which is the control device, from the device that they have access to. And then I want to find out that how many ways they can get it, and then can I represent it as a graph, and I want to break that graph so that they will never reach to their destination, which is the attack device. So it will be multiple level hierarchy and producer successor structure. Top node is that's where the destination that they want to reach. They're starting from different, and that's another thing, right? So in your example of going from home to lab, I only took one example of one student or one professor, but there might be multiple students who all want to reach to the same lab and same office. And if that's the case, then to reach to the top node, there are multiple, which is top node is your lab. There are 10 students who are trying to reach there, so 10 attackers are trying to follow different path to reach to that same thing. The one who reached there first will be the attacker, right? And compromise, they will do the compromise. So top node is the ultimate goal, and the predecessor of each leaf attributed with the N and R, which means that either you can do this way or you can do another path. And this is just one way, right? So attack tree is not the only way to analyze that possible ways to get what we are trying to find out. What are the different access path to take if you start from here and want to reach there? There's a Monte Carlo, analysis. You can do that. Markov chain analysis. You can do that. But for each of these, you need to trace the access point with the information from the system. So there are a lot of these mathematical things is possible. An analytical method to measure vulnerability of control center related computer system, and we want to measure these vulnerabilities, and then finally the if access is easier, then of course the chances of getting compromised becomes easier too. The other thing that we can work out with this possibility is that attack leaves, which are always being used to reach to the destination. So it doesn't matter that you start from C1 or C2 or C3, you go through one device to reach to the final device that you want to compromise. Then maybe I need to make that device more secure, because everyone or any attacker is taking that device to reach to the destination that they want to. So there are some cyber attack that is happening now. You can actually, and this is just we don't know that, but this suspected attack, you can actually go to any of these devices, like NorthCorp or FireEye. Maybe if time permit, I'll try to show you one, and get to the suspected attack that is happening right now. So let me quickly go through the cyber attack classification, and then we'll take a break. So there are different kind of attack that is happening. Man in the middle attack, which is, again, this is source and destination. So this is the source, and this is the destination that they want to reach. They have to go through the two devices. If I break this path, either by stopping this or by monitoring it, or by changing the data value itself, something leaves here, I modified it, the one that they get here is different. That is called man in the middle attack, which of course makes sense because it's being modified, changed in the middle. Other one is just monitoring it, so eavesdropping, which is unauthorized access of information sent over the network. You have service attack that it leaves the source, but it will never reach to the destination, and that's why I'm denying the service to reach there. Um, Sometime I can deny or I can send it falsified data, which is spoofing messages, which is looks like exactly the same thing, but now we are not altering it. We are just creating a new set of data, uh, which is exactly look like that, and the destination will not even know that what it's getting is not the actual data set. Again, vulnerabilities and access is important for all these kind of four things. Availability attack is possible when you do the denial of service attack. Is example of like if you remember the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, denial of service, and even this one is definitely you know can create a problem for availability, and so that this one too, right? So this is a availability problem because it's not available on the other end. There are multiple ways to do that. So with server, everything has a memory, and memory has a limit. So you can do the buffer overflow, a SYN flood, all these kind of will result into a denial of service attack. Man in the middle attack, something is leaving the relay or the PMUs and getting to the control room, and man in the middle attack is basically modifying it, which is unauthorized access. Now, if you look at the whole landscape, we talked about that compromise is happening because of vulnerabilities, and there's a access. Um, with all of these things happening, the first thing important is CVE, right? That's what we have been talking about. So all of these OT devices, relay PMUs, everything which is helping us to operate the grid in this whole power grid will have CVEs, and then if the password is like a default or it's inadequate physical access, it is going to be compromised, and it will result into a physical device damage or code corruption, right? If the network device, which is incorrectly configured, that's why it is vulnerable. There's a lack of network segmentation, which means it's not isolated. It is somehow it's got connected with a known network where the attacker has access to, or publicly available, or there are open ports that we are not aware of. We did not close it. Again, that access becomes important, right? So device has vulnerabilities, but with the access, attacker can get into that and then can launch a man-in-the-middle attack, service attack, a protocol which is running on top of these network devices, may have lack of authentication, insufficient encryption, and that may result into spoofing attack, false data injection attacks. Software, that's where you have these CVEs, but software also have access control problem, and maybe weak password or insecure APIs or inadequate access control policy will result into an unauthorized update of these OT devices configuration firmware, which might be the wrong update, going even back the opposite side to expose more vulnerabilities. On top of these, there is application running, right? And then you can do the memory. I mean, attacker can do the memory corruption, improper input validation for the command injection, and then application might crash or impact the monitoring and display false information. So these are only a few examples. It is so vast that we cannot talk about all of these things. But here are the OT component: application, software, protocols, network devices, OT devices. Here is the attack surface, and these are the possible threats or outcome. We can also rank these devices to decide the criticality of these cyber assets, right? And of course, the control center is the most important, and the one which gives us the situational awareness, and even the decision support is EMS. That will be most important. EMS might be the second, then the process control system, power plants, and then substation automation system, right? So these are ranked because of critical, because this is down, your whole system is down, right? It is a much more impact. While substation, well, one substation is down, but other substation are operating. So all of these are important, but which has a higher impact is another thing. A little bit more about SCADA. So of course we talked about electric power mainly, right? It can have transmission, distribution, substation, wind, solar, all this SCADA connect to. There are a lot of protocols that runs here: ICCP, DNP3, Modbus, TCP/IP. We have not talked about each of these, but because there is no intro of these protocols, there are so many. Especially if you talk about now electric vehicle, it has its own protocol. PME has its own protocol. Each are deciding that how the data packet should flow and how it should look like. There are so many framework: data polling, acquisition control, automation, interlocking. There are so many input variables: voltage, current, frequency, time, active, reactive power, apparent power. Control variables like switching devices. Of course, there are others too. And then there are application which is running on top of this: energy management system, DMS, substation. But there is a lot of parallel between other domain also. So I can compare this electric power with the natural gas system. I can compare this with the transportation, and maybe we can learn from each other, right? So, for example, in framework, automation with the PLC, the example protocol is field bus and Profibus. In sectors, the gas pipeline, chemical, oil and gas, power plants. There are different control like a wall and pump, and there are different software. It's like here, it's generation management system and resource planning management. Same thing for transportation, right? So if input variables here are traffic and roadway sensor, visual closed circuit television sensor, voice communication, pro vehicle database services, GPS also here being used. So all of these, and again, these are not only three infrastructure, but there are more infrastructure. You have a whole railway system which is connecting from one point to another one, which would be transportation. We also have a mobile network system. You also have banking, and all of these have a similar uh, kind of classification, and SCADA is helping with that. So we'll stop on the security part. Maybe before taking a break, we can take some time to address any questions, and then we'll start with the resiliency part. So I only see one question. If the data through communication protocol, Modbus, DNP3, I6250 is manipulated before control center, is it IT attack or OT attack? So it will be OT attack, because to get to the control center, it's typically connected to the only OT side. And DNP3, Modbus, IC6150, all is OT protocol. Now, if enterprise system is connected to the control center, which should not be, but let's say it's connected for some reason, and that TCP/IP packet is being modified, then there will be probably IT attack. So it depends on we define first what is OT, what is IT, and then if the as soon as the attack happens and compromise happen, I can exactly figure out that where it's connected and where the attack happened. So if there's no more questions, maybe we'll take 3 minutes break, and then after 3 minutes we'll start the cyber resiliency part.
Yeah, that's perfect. So we can take it.
Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully we can talk about cyber resiliency now.
Yeah.
Let me share the slides. So we're going to talk about cyber resiliency and metric, which is kind of next step after talking about security, right? So resiliency and resiliency metric. So what is cyber resilience? There is no standard definition, right? Which means that we don't have any IEEE standard or uh, any definition, just like we will have for reliability. And because we don't have that, there is so many other definition that was given by a survey, when asked by one of author, which is Aaron Clark Ginsberg, that what is cyber resilience. There is actually few paper written after that there are multiple different definition. That also means that we can you know determine some definition and then can take view from multiple different people and then agree on one definition, at least in majority, right? So there are different thoughts, but most of the people agree after several meeting in SIGRE and several IEEE that resiliency is about, it's not only about making it secure, which is withstand, right? So if you're secure, more secure, then we can withstand an attack. We will not allow that attack, right? So withstanding is which means security, uh, and we're talking about cyber resiliency here. So security should be definitely one of the part. If you can withstand it, which means that you're secure, then you will be, uh, basically more resilient. But there are other things too, resiliency, which is not in security, which means that if attacked, if compromised, how soon we can recover. How soon recover means that we are talking about the power grid recovery, that there has been damage in the power grid or there has been damage in the cyber system. How soon I can recover and make it less impactful on the system. Going back where we were operating will be ideal, but responding back, recovering back will be important. Now, there are some other things which can also be added in resiliency definition, where it is more like a future looking thing, right? So, adopt, which means that how do I determine or how do we make the system able to change itself to minimize the impact, right? So, we are talking about more like a machine intelligence and AI kind of analysis, which will be able to adopt as soon as it senses that something has been compromised, and still keep the system running and going, and self isolate that the part which has been compromised. There is a lot to do in that area. I think it's still very futuristic, such a complex system, and make it adopt to ongoing attack and detecting it in time and isolating it in such a way that uh, system ability to adapt to minimize the impact is a little bit future forward thing. But doesn't mean that we cannot do research on that, right? We can try to do research on that, and so that we can show some prototype in some condition that okay, adapt is possible, and then we have to make sure that adapt is possible in all the different conditions, right? All the different attack vectors that can happen. This is something that we have been doing, like predicting and preventing. Predicting in for attack is, of course, as you think, is almost impossible, right? How do you predict attack unless anything is detected? But once you detect that okay, attacker is now in the device 1 of substation 3, can we predict that where the attacker will go next? And that is possible because they have compromised something, and most probably they already know that how to compromise that specific vulnerability which exists in a specific vendor, and with the specific CVE. Now, if it's an unknown vulnerability, then we cannot probably predict. Um, but we still can guess few things because that device that which is compromised is connected with another device 5 and device 7 in the same substation, so we know that where they will go next. So it's possible to do some prediction, and if you can predict it, then of course by disconnecting that access you'll prevent future attacks. But this prediction and prevention can only start after we detect the first attack. Otherwise, my prediction is that any CV that exists will be compromised, which is not very useful for any analysis. For weather related impact, it's very different, right? For weather related impact, actually, we can do much better prediction. So resiliency, if I need to define with that concept of uh, WRAP, or sometimes we call it AWR, because P is again prediction. For cyber is very different. So anticipate, withstand, and recover. Right. I mean, if you look at the before the time, during the attack, and after the attack. Right. So AWR or RAP, these are the two concept that we have been working on for a long time and have written a lot of papers on these, or even a book. So resilience is now, if you can define the ability to supply its critical load, because that's the ultimate goal, in spite of limited uh, extreme cyber contingency, right? So that's the goal. There's a lot of concept which helps to make us more cyber resilient, right? If we are operational security is good, which means N minus one and minus two has been done. Even if the cyber attacker brings the one line down, we should be, still okay because it should not cause a problem, right? So all of these problems that already exist, system hardening, which means like physical hardening of systems, and IT security. I Retex said if you're secure, then you can withstand better. Reliability, everything that we do to make the system more redundant, so it's reliable. We talked about restoration process. As soon as the power outage happen, how do you restore that? Same thing you can talk about cyber restoration problem. As these things happen, um, all of these is going to help us to become more resilient. And some concepts come from cyber, some is come from physical, and then resiliency. Again, you'll see later that when Dr. Cosmos is going to talk about uh, you know starting tomorrow, which is more on modeling, cyber physical modeling and test bed. But uh, day after tomorrow, we'll talk about detection and classification and root cause and mitigation. These will become very important, and you'll see that why and how it impacts the resiliency. So we already talked about there is certain difference between resiliency and reliability, and before we go to the next slide, we want to just make sure that you keep asking questions in the chat, because today we'll be done with the resiliency and resiliency metric, and tomorrow we are going to focus more on going back to modeling. So how do I model the cyber system, and how do I connect to the physical system, so you can do the test bed development, and you'll see that it's not a one way of doing that. You can do it in 100 different ways, right? We will talk about 4 different things. I'll talk about tomorrow before you see some hands-on by Dr. Cosmos. So resilience and reliability, there's a certain difference. Resilience is basically not only how secure you are, but how you can anticipate it and how you can recover it, right? While this one is all about performance, reliability. That something happened, did you perform well or not? Sometime in resiliency, because we know we cannot provide power to everyone which is connected, and we have to focus only on critical load. As we do that in reliability, we don't have this critical load priority. So all the connected load is measured for the reliability. Resiliency indication of preparedness of a network, because it also has withstand and it can can avoid extreme events. Well, reliability is not about that, right? So it is all about performance. And if actually right now, if the cyber attack happen or weather impact happen or something that utility cannot control it, that is not even counted. In metric, there's no at least agreed and formal metrics. Of course, there's a lot in research. We also have our own, but there's no formal agreed resiliency metric. While in reliability, we have a standard that everyone follows: CD, SAFE, MEFI, and similar. So, what are the steps to compute composite resiliency metric? The way we do it, and there are multiple ways to do that. One is performance based, and one is system characteristic based. So ours is a system characteristic, and it takes the cyber system, it takes the physical system, it model as a graph, right? So you can do certain analysis. You can extract some number from the system property. So we do the network parameter. We, one of the way, which is not the only way, because we have a series of different metric for different purpose. So percolation there is something called percolation theory, which means that if you open one tap, one water tap, let's say in your house, which is connected, water is coming from somewhere, right? And it's coming from most probably a tank, which is somewhere installed in your neighborhood, and that tank is might be connected to another tank, and both are feeding it. Or if the tank is gone, then of course you will not get the water at your home. But if you have another tank, then you'll probably get it. And this percolation of water to your tap from a water tank is very similar to load being supplied through energy resources, either it's a DER or it is a generator, which is transferring the power to the to substation, or it's a bigger generating like a solar and uh, even storage, right? So typically in water analogy, you will not have that many tanks unless you have a smaller tank at your house, which will also feed to up to certain level, just like a battery will do until it's discharged. Now, using the same analogy, we can do the percolation theory analysis and convert that to equation. And the ultimate goal being that ability of load being supplied by a multiple source, if I can find a path from the source to the load. And then determine the critical fraction of node that can be damaged. So if the damage has been done by the either weather event or physical event. And I am still talking about weather event because resiliency is applied to any extreme scenario, even though our focus is cyber here. So once we have a graph, ultimate goal is that can load be supplied by multiple sources, and if the path is available, right? So these three things are important, and also the control is important, and all four things together is going to determine my resiliency. If I'm going through the system characteristic process. So topological resilience becomes the first thing, which is basically the path, right? So if the water in your home is coming in your tap, it has to find a path from the source tank Like I said, that could be tank number bigger tank 1, bigger tank 2, or it can be even the smaller tank, which is at the top of your house, right? Um, all these source has to have energy, right? Which is here it's a potential energy, and that's why the water is falling. And here it's in the power grid, it's electrical energy which is being generated. But the path from the tank to the tap is same like a path which is a network here, distribution network, or sometimes a transmission network, which is connecting your source to the load. So that path, how redundant it is, how many ways I can reach from source to load, will be a topological resilience. If it is going through a single node again and again, right? So if you have one way of getting the water into your house, and only one pipeline exists, and it's not connected to multiple feed, then that is more vulnerable, because if that is damaged, then water will be gone, right? Same thing here. If there is one node, which is the node that has to be connected to supply power to a critical load, and there is only one path to get there, my topological resonance will be lower. So we used a lot of different factors which I can extract from the graph, which we call it topological resilience, and then we use AHP, which is analytical hierarchical process, which is one of the multi-criteria decision-making process, to combine these factors and give us the metrics. Okay, so this is a topological resilience matrix. And then we can also evaluate the composite resiliency, where topological becomes one factor. But then also we can focus on power flow feasibility. We can focus on that, how many loads remain connected. And then also the other factors which will impact the resiliency. So what are those factors from the, at least from the graph, like branch count factor, that how many different paths I can take from the source to the load. Is there any overlapping? Because we depend more on that, right? Switching operation, how many switching operation we need to do to close that or make that path possible. How many sources are being repeated, if any path is possible. Redundancy, which is kind of related to the overlapping branches, but it's different, because I can count that I can reach from, the same thing. If you go from your house to the or home or apartment to the lab, you can take multiple paths to reach there. So if one of the smaller road is damaged, you can find another path to reach there, right? So same thing here, path redundancy. But if there's only one road exist, then of course you don't have any redundancy, and then you're less resilience. So same thing here. Second thing is that if there is one road that is, one segment of road which is being used again and again for all the possible path, then your overlapping branches will increase, which will make the system again less resilient. Probability of availability of resources, which is also important, and then one node central point dominance, which if you compare that with your path from your apartment or your house to the lab, if you need to go to one intersection where the road meets again and again in all the possible path, then you're relying on that intersection more, and that's a central point dominance. So these are some of the factors which is coming from the only network. Switching operation, how many normally close exist, and how many normally open exist that need to be changed, is another factor for resiliency. And then how many of those are power feasible, power flow feasible is another factor. With all those things together, ultimate goal is that how many ways I can reach to the critical load from the resources. I can convert that to equation. So, like there are different paths possible, but there are only few which is feasible. So then feasible to all the possible path will become my path redundancy. And in the same way, there's a lot of different factors here, but I can find the edge count, I can find the overlapping edges, I can compute the switching operation, repetition of sources, centrality index, probability of availability, penalty factor, and then combine all those things. So as as we talked about, resiliency depends on ultimate goal of supplying power to the critical load. Who is stopping us? Attacker, by disconnecting path, by disconnecting generation, and what are those factors which will allow me to reach if I have more and higher redundancy in the system. So it is network, it is control, it is resources, and then availability of those resources, and then location of those load, critical load especially, which will tell me the resiliency. So we basically collect all those and factor, and then you will see that over the time it evolved. We keep on adding more factors or taking out some factor because this is more makes sense for macrogrid resiliency or for transmission resiliency or for distribution resiliency or for IoT resiliency. So we keep adding and taking out different factors, but the concept remains the same, that we have a number of factors which will impact my ability to supply critical load. And as it does, we will collect those factors and normalize it and then find out the resiliency combined factor. So you can do the same thing for the cyber, and you can do the same thing for the physical, and you can keep the two different resiliency factors, one for the physical system and one for the cyber. You can even combine, but we have not combined because these are very diverse set of system, right? So it's not so there is you cannot even normalize it and does not make sense. So we kept these two separate: cyber system resiliency and physical system resiliency. Um, Once we have this factor, then you have to find the interaction between these factors, and that's what we call interaction index. The way to combine these, all the number that we compute, requires some kind of multi-criteria decision-making process. So you can use Shawker integral, you can use AHP that we have, just talked earlier, analytical hierarchical process. You can use ANP. All these multi-criteria decision-making process, which one to decide, really depends on uh, your characteristic of different factor that you're trying to integrate and what are the system levels factors. So quick example on this, if you want to apply this and you have this microgrid 1 and microgrid 2, there are some critical load, which is like this highlighted one, critical load 2, critical load 1. And then there are tie line, which is normally open. You can close it to reach to the critical load, but you have to open something, so it's always become a radial system. As we analyze and apply the same thing, you can see that different loads are given with the P and Q, and which microgrid they are connected. There are only two sources, DG1 and DG2, which is distributed one, and of course you have a feed, which is substation feed from here, main feed. And by applying these, you get certain number with operational use cases, and we find out that if the fault happens here, then the possible path and resiliency driven switching will tell us that, okay, make this FN5, which is a feasible network FN5, which is one of the network which will go from here to here, here to here, right? What is important here is that even though it's not shown that what are those feasible network, but the power flow should be solvable, and network is changing because you're changing the switching. So different fault happens, which is caused by cyber attack, uh, and you get different decisions at which switch to close and which switch to open to determine that how to maximize my resiliency. You can also think about in planning cases that if we have some money and I can buy switches, right? So where do I put this switch? And I can determine that decision where to put it by analyzing a lot of different possibility where I can put. You have to come up with the possibilities. You have to know the cases first, and then we can see that with what are the feasible network, and then calculate the resiliency metric, and then we'll decide that okay, for this case is F14, for this case F12, for other case Fn6, Fn7, and then you need to see that which case is more, and then where the resiliency is increasing highest, and then there are four possible location which will all increase resiliency, but the one Fn2 or maybe Fn6 makes it the highest possible resiliency increase. So just a quick overview of that was you need to collect the factors and then you can use it for operation and planning purpose. If you add the cyber side too, then you need data for first from the cyber side to analyze. So it will be either into the system files, or it can look at the log files also. So there are some streaming data and some files which you need to call. Patches are needed for these vulnerabilities, and then what we want to do is analyze the impact of these events on the power grid. CVSS, which is one of the score which is already published by First Reliability, can be one of the starting point, but we will have our own score that I have talked about earlier, that what is impacting the power grid. Physical resiliency could be same thing that we just discussed with the graph theory and power system characteristic and symmetrical, and then where the DRs are located. And then by combining all these things together, we'll get a cyber physical resilience, right? So I'll take the example of cyber physical resiliency using the uh, you know uh, one tool that we developed specific to the IoTs. And before we develop the resiliency score, we wanted to define that okay, what is the IoT for the power grid, right? Because IoT exists, but in all the domains. So IoT is according to IEEE, which has the following attributes: it can connect to others and can exchange information. It has unique IP address. It can connect to the control device or power source or load, and has a computing capability, right? It should have some autonomous activity. It should be plug and play. And if you take the same thing and apply it to the power grid, where the IoTs are, HVAC controller, even solar PV on the rooftop controller, battery storage controller, electric vehicle charging controller, becomes IoT, right? So remember that IoT is a digital device. So of course, HVAC itself is a physical device, so that's not IoT, but it is connected to a controller, which is IoT. Same thing for solar PV, connected to a controller, which is IoT, and storage connected to controller. Electric vehicle is connected to controller. So you'll have a similar, definition for this. It should connect. It should have an IP address. It should connect to the power source or load or control devices. It should have computing. It should be autonomous. It should be plug and play. Now with this one, one thing that becomes tricky is that these things are tied with the customer, and that means it becomes a privacy issue. So sensitive information with the utility or microgrid operator, we cannot provide this data directly because of direct access to the IoT data is causing the problem to privacy. So there are limitations of this data availability, and then we want to preserve this data while still make the resiliency score, right? So now let's take the example of this small distribution system, which has the first transformer and then the a primary node feeding to the secondary transformer and then connected to the multiple houses, which may have solar rooftop, which may have battery, which may have electric vehicle, right? And each houses has either all three or maybe one of these. They all have HVAC system, we assume. They have a PV, they have battery, the electric vehicle, appliances, and I can model it. So we use actually, you can model in OpenDSS, you can model in GridLabD, you can model in ETAP, any software which allows you to model three phase, and then this DER kind of load, you can model it. For the cyber, which you will talk about more tomorrow, you have a different choices, but we use the Mininet in this case to model the IoT network with house building IoT hub, and then which is to talk to the HVAC, to talk to the PV, to the battery and EV. Of course, from the house, which is from here, there is a network here, but there's a network also model from here to the, to the first collection point, and from there to the distribution control room. The advantage is that, of course, we get real information like IP, port information, packet length, intra-communication packet delays, and ARP table, which is basically telling me that how the data is being delivered and what path it's following. So with all the, this model, the first thing we wanted to see that if I get the data from these IoT, can I trust it? And to do that trustability score, we need some kind of information about the data that is being reported. So you got this input data, which is measurement. And one way to find was that should we trust or not is trying to train the neural network, which is here is autoencoder, and generate the same data, which we call reconstructed data, for non-scenario. So if there's no compromise, we trained in all the different possible condition, different possible network, and different possible single contingency issues or some problems. Now, once we learn this behavior, if the anomaly happens, which we did not learn, then my reconstructed data will not match with the input data. So this is the, again, this is only one way of doing things. We have done other work where we find these, and you will learn about that when we talk about machine learning on day after tomorrow. There are so many different approaches for each of these things. Again, goal here is that find out the anomalies in input data, which is a measurement, but do it locally. So we do use the federated machine learning and collected all the aggregated information from here with the federated learning, where we are having the weights and also computing these factors. And then in this whole process, which is running at the each house level, we run the autoencoder with the, here we use the GridLabD model, we use the Mininet Wi-Fi model, and then after the training, which is done with the federated learning, we have this monitoring or supervisory function where we can compute this ITS trustability score. And then we got this tolerance value where we can accumulate all the anomaly ratio and then get this cumulative non-anomaly ratio, right? And using this cumulative non-anomaly ratio, we can get the IoT trustability score. Again, what it's doing is that if I trust, then it should follow what I have learned for the normal behavior through the neural network. And if it is not following that, then there is a possibility that it has some anomaly. We don't know it, a cyber attack, cyber failure, or something else that I have not learned. But at least it triggers further analysis that, okay, there's something wrong. Then once we have this ITS score, the next thing becomes the primarily node level resiliency metric formulation, where we look at the physical primary node, which is the factor that we're considering is going back to the same logic that we have talked earlier. Find all the factor that impacts your ability to provide the critical load, right? So in physical, we got available generation, amount of critical load, connectivity, redundancy. In a cyber physical primary node without IoT, we got same thing, but also device and communication vulnerabilities. And then in a node with IoT, we got also this trustability score, right? Remember that there's some node without IoT and there's some node with IoT. There are different types depending on that it is connected to the solar plus battery plus also EVs or not. So now with these certain number of factors, I need to integrate it so I can get to the resiliency score. And here we analyze, we integrated these factors using this fuzzy analytical hierarchy process, fuzzy AHP, which is another multi-criteria decision making process. And it gives me a final factor which can be integrated into the primary level node resiliency metrics. We call it PNR. There's a whole process going on with the fuzzy AHP, which gives us the integrated matrix. So again, we are not going into detail of these things, but essentially what it's doing is that taking the multiple factor, integrating into a single number so we can get to the resiliency score. Once we got the nodal resiliency, right? So if you go back to this system, we got the resiliency first at the IoT level, which is called ITS. We integrated ITS to get the primary node level resiliency metric at each transformer. Once we know this one, then from this primary node resiliency, we can go to the distribution substation and get the distribution system resiliency. So this is what is going on. Aggregation on top of second aggregation and then third aggregation. And then distribution system resiliency matrix, a lot of different equation. Again, it's doing the same thing, applying AHP to here we also apply some kind of data development analysis DA problem with certain kind of game theory to get to the distribution system resiliency, right? Again, we are not going to detail because we are understanding the process, collecting the factor which impacts my ability to supply critical load, combining it so we can get to the resiliency score. Now this resiliency score, you can see that it works in, because there's no way to validate other than doing the event and seeing that is resiliency changing or not. So we did this two different kinds, sort suspicious event and malicious event. This one is basically saying that one of the house has a solar PV, which actually got disconnected, but there is no manipulation or attack there. We'll see, it will result into basically this kind of performance. But if the malicious attack happen, which is going to do the some kind of disconnection, and that will be shown in a different way. So if you compute the ITS, you compute the non-anomaly ratio, you compute the PNR, and then combine that together into a single resiliency value, this is how it looks like, right? So, so SSC, which is the blue one, this one, is almost flat because there's no attack, right? So even it got disconnected, but you will not, cyber is not showing you anything. So you will not get this much impact. While the second one, which is malicious event, which is ME, which is the red one, which is basically this one, you'll see a drop. And at one point, because of this attack, DR disconnect and they will be further dropped and then you see. So it's essentially what it is telling me, that as these things are happening and we are not aware that, if I detect it, then of course it's all good. But if you're not aware, then we want a single number which will tell me that something has been attacked and here is a problem, and that will trigger me to take a defense action, right? Because if I can detect, then of course a defense action will be right away. But if I cannot detect, then this is a trigger, right here, right where this trigger should allow me before we get to this point, that okay, take the action and don't allow it. So DR should not be disconnected. I can use it for different purpose, right? So IoT testability score we talked about with federated learning. We talked about this PNR, which is fuzzy multiple current decision making process, and then game theory based AHP, which is giving me distribution system vigilance. I can use it for different application, planning for next investment analysis, planning to do the operational resiliency with the multiple microgrid, and over the years we have been developing a lot of different things. So the one that I just talked about is the last year product, which we call CP Dream, is our physical resiliency for distributed system with IoT. There are some YouTube video, if you search for our lab name and canvas, you'll get that on each of these Cypher, CPSAM. So we have developed for microgrid, we have developed for military microgrid, we have developed for distribution system, one of the earlier version, and then continued that for more sophisticated CPSAM, which CVE is considered, and CPTRAM, where we also consider the CVE and then report for the transmission system. Let me quickly take this example. So what happened in Ukraine attack 2015? The email was sent to a lot of different employee, and then phishing email. One of the employee clicked on that, got the basically malware installed, and then from their IT site, it slowly made its way to the OT, and then attack happened. Right. So we have gone through that, but now we use the same on one of the software, which is this one, Cypher, to analyze this attack. Right. So in Cypher, we are getting the network data, we're getting the vulnerabilities analysis, we're getting the alerts, we're getting the measurements, which are the SCADA from the cyber and physical both. And then we are finding the impact analysis, and then real-time cyber impact security analysis, which again I've not gone through detail, but the process same. Get the factors, compute some metrics, and then compute the final metrics. And you can see that as the different event was unfolding, this is very rough view. This is not going to all the detail, but as soon as the malware was installed, the resiliency will go down. As soon as the VPN with stolen credential happen, it will go further down. And then elevated privilege, it will go further down, and then the damage happens, physical impact. Here we had a backup power, which was on, but typically you will not have. And if I take the action right away here, because seeing the slope of resiliency drop, if I take a control action here, resiliency could have been preserved. Everything is fine, malware is disabled, and you will never get here at this point. So what the resiliency score does, it basically combines all the information into aggregated score, so I can see the overall view, because I need less information, but a gist of everything that's going on into the system. There's no doubt resiliency is a very complex problem, right? So these metrics are just example of doing things. There's a lot of scope to further, improve it, further extend it. And as long as metric is telling me that what is the resiliency will be if I take this action, or attacker is in, they have taken something action, and resiliency has dropped. Resiliency metric will tell me what to do, right? It depends on how flexible infrastructure you have, how secure infrastructure you have, and then how my power control application can be made resilient. Either it's a generation, automatic generation control, transmission control, or distribution control. our cyber infrastructure, how much we are applying the similar and basic security concept: authentication, encryption, access control, attestation, forensic analysis, patch management. You remember that vulnerability can be patched, software audits, you know. So these are all security practices, which we'll talk about again, on ninth day, which is third day from now. And then, of course, flexible infrastructure. As much flexibility you have to operate as a macrogrid or nanogrid, you'll be able to isolate and keep the power on to that load, even if the main grid is gone. So, how do you gracefully disintegrate and still keep the system going? And that depends on flexibility to switch in, switch out, a lot of different component, isolate the smallest part uh, to make it resilient. At least in our view, resiliency metric is a multi-carrier decision-making process. It is definitely different from reliability, which because reliability is only performance-based. Resilience is telling that why and what can be done, right? And also ability to recover. But other thing, if you remember, the anticipate, withstand, and recover. Uh, it depends on multiple factor, and that's what we do: combine those factor to get into the single metric. Definition is still something that the community, unless the standard comes, we don't have those agreed upon. But I think a lot has been done over the years that most of the people agree on this: anticipate, withstand, and recovery. Okay, so before we stop, one thing that we need to understand that whatever that can be hacked will be hacked. So attackers are always out there. We are seeing them, and anything worth hacking will be hacked also, right? So it's important that we understand the cyber physical integration and interdependency of this, and then how a cyber attack will result into a physical impact. That's what their goal is. And we already know that a lot of these are already being compromised. Most of the time we are able to detect it from the IT side, but if you're not, then how do you protect is really important. Okay, let me see if we have any questions. So, okay, good. A lot of questions. Federated learning helpful for privacy preserving? Yes. So federated learning is taking the information and making it federated. So the machine learning will not process all the information together, and that will help us to preserve the privacy. Is it better to use it for attack detection, smart grids and microgrids? So yeah, so federated learning is one of the small piece to get to the get to the one part of resiliency, which is detection, and it can be definitely used. So you can, like in our case, we use the federated learning to detect anomaly, right? So federated was making it privacy preserving, and the learning was learning the common